Well, David Frost here, and I've got with me three men who are going to contribute to the cascade of comedy we laughingly call Pull the Other One. And they are Frank Carson, Leslie Crowther, and KenDodd. Right. Now, our other contributors, of course, are the many people throughout the world who've done odd things that have made the press. Like, for instance, Pamela Benning and Jack Carlson, who held their wedding ceremony on the ice of Lake St. Clair, the inland sea which separates Canada from the USA. Now, why did they do this? Well, Pam was from Toronto, Jack from Detroit. Neither wanted to marry in the other's country. So they compromised by getting married on the ice in between. The wedding guests wore snowsuits. The bride wore thermal underwear.
Charming.
And instead of confetti, the couple were pelted with snowballs. And the groom got frostbite in a most unusual place.
Well,
Toronto.
Lovely. I hope she didn't break it off.
Did he get icicles on his tricycle?
Not entirely.
No.
Well, that's the kind of dark but true story we want, and we've got them for our experts, and we'll be asking them for their explanations. Halfway through, we'll have a little variation for you, but more of that later on. So off we go, gentlemen. Shortly before Christmas in 1974, a bearded man crossed a Vancouver street and smashed a shop window with a baseball bat. Why did he do this? And why was he disappointed at the result? Leslie.
What I reckon, what? He had a beard just before Christmas. He must have been hired as the Father Christmas for that particular store.
Yeah, I like
and he'd found how much money he was getting, or how little money he was getting. He was so livid, he got his baseball bat and smashed the window as a form of protest.
Well, I don't believe in Christmas because it saves you buying presents. I was a Father Christmas.
Yeah,
What happened to your father?
He was Father Christmas at... This is true, actually. He was Father Christmas at Selfridges, and he told me one day he was out of work. He was an actor, and he was out of work, so he was Father Christmas at Selfridges. And this young boy came up one day and said, you don't half get about, don't you? And he said, what do you mean, get about, dear boy? What do you mean? He said, well, you were in Harrods about half an hour ago. He said, oh, yes, so you are a clever little boy, aren't you? He said, are you going to be at Bentall's on Wednesday afternoon? And not to ruin the mystique, my father said, oh, I expect I will. He said, well, you'll be bloody lonely. It's their half-day closing.
Kenneth.
This is, it's quite a good picture, isn't it? A man, beard, crosses the street, smashes a window. A fella I knew once threw a brick through a jeweller's window in Bond Street, here in London. The jeweller picked it up, brushed it off, polished it, laid it on a piece of blue velvet and sold it for about 150 quid. Can't be done to stand for anything.
Well, that reminds me of the burglar. And he was out with his wife doing a bit of Christmas shopping. She said, I'd like a fur coat. And he threw a brick through a window and got her a fur coat. And he said, I'd like a diamond bracelet. And he threw a brick through the window and got her a diamond bracelet. And she said, I'd like a refrigerator and a deep freeze. He says, what do you think? I'm made of bricks.
Did you hear about the Irishman that went window shopping? Brought 36 windows.
I'm worried about...
When the Irishman opened the paper shop and it blew away.
Leslie.
Aye.
Well, I'm just so worried about you. I mean, do you like pantomime if you don't like Christmas?
Yes, I do. Well, I love pantomime. I was in Aladdin and his wonderful lamp. I played the wick. But I got the sack because I was too well oiled every night. But a baseball bat, you see, by smashing the... I think I know what was after.
He sold a lot of boxes inside, Christmas presents. When he goes out, they were all empty. They're all dummies.
No, I think what has happened here... This man, a bearded man, crossed a Vancouver street.
Have you ever imagined what Frank...
How could he cross anything else?
What you would look like with a beard? You'd look like a tramp peeping through a hedge.
Yeah. Have you any other nice things to say about it?
Well, it was either going to be you or Leslie Crowther, and because you're the prettiest, I thought I'd pick on you.
Well, I think what has happened here, this man smashed the shop window in frustration.
He must have seen something in the window that he wanted very badly.
He saw it, no, something that he didn't like.
No.
It could have been one of your records.
Was it a...
No, something that he wanted very badly. The Frank Carson Book of Wit and Humour. It's a very slim volume.
Yes. and you'll enjoy colouring it in.
Well, you haven't quite got there, folks. The man smashed the shop window in to get himself arrested and sent back to prison. He wanted to be in jail at that time to take part in the inmates' Christmas concert.
Very good.
He'd been rehearsing there for months, and he was suddenly given an unwanted pardon. But alas, it didn't work, because the would-be jailbird was doomed to disappointment. It being the season of goodwill, the shopkeeper declined to press charges.
No.
Well, of course, they do this in this country. You know, if anybody gets locked up over Christmas...
They don't.
No, they make a fuss of them.
Fuss, of course they do.
They don't get a picture. They get a sausage with a feather stuck in it. But that's... it's still Christmas dinner, isn't it?
Yeah, of course it is.
Christmas in the nick.
There was a friend of mine got 6 months for doing his Christmas shopping too early.
How early?
Well, he was in the shop before it opened.
Oh,
That sounds true. That sounds true.
Canada, of course. Canada is a vast continent.
It is,
Lots of Irish people there, lots of Scots people there.
The largest lake in the world is in Canada.
That's where they shout, there's a moose loose about the hoose.
The lake there is Lake Superior, which is exactly the same size as the Isle of Man, because they think it was a giant who lifted a big lump of earth out of the ground in Canada and threw it across the ocean and landed.
Are you making this up as you go along?
Yeah.
A man called Crowther once went to Canada and he saw the sign, "Drink Canada Dry," and he tried for several years.
Right, well, we've dealt with Canada. Now, talking of drinking, the next problem is to do with drinking. I'd like your explanations here. The great comedian Jimmy Wheeler was known to take the occasional alcoholic beverage, which rarely affected his performance. But once, while waiting to go on at a star-studded charity show in London, he showed definite signs of inebriation. The producer looked at him, bemused in his dressing room, surrounded by empty bottles and the odd full one, and he decided on emergency action. What was it?
No comedians are ever the worst for wear. I know very, very few comedians even drink. I mean, I've seen you have an occasional tizer.
Oh, yes.
I'm on the dandelion and burdock. But Jimmy had a marvellous gag. He said this girl had a long hair growing out the end of her nose, and when she sneezed, it cracked like a whip.
It's lovely, isn't it?
He had another one. He said a fellow was shaving, and he had one of those open razors, and the razor slipped and it cut his nose off, and he got so frightened, he dropped the razor, cut his toe off, and the surgeon showed the nose where the toe was, and the toe where the nose is. So every time he sneezed, his blood flew up. He blew.
All right. Here's another one you won't like. Both these funny men alongside me, they're both drinking water. This is a wonderful thing. A lot of people think that comics need Dutch courage. Now,
No.
Foreign lager, I don't like it.
No,
I don't know. Heineken, rubbish. I think...
Mind you, lots of actors very often. I mean, what about that amateur actor who got drunk because he was terrified about this line? He had to come on stage and say, "Hark, I heard a pistol shot."
Yeah.
Well, exactly. And he came on and he said, "Hark, I heard a shustle pit. A shistle pot. A postle. Did anybody hear that bang?"
The great actor...
What about the announcer? What about the announcer who couldn't say Rimsky-Korsakov? He had to. You see, it's not comics. You're right. It's actors and announcers, people like you. And this guy couldn't say Rimsky-Korsakov, so he had a bit of a squiddle, you know, before this thing, and he said the next composition is by that well-known Russian composer, Rimsky-Korsakov, and it is the bum of the Flytleby.
Oh, you little devil, Leslie.
All actors, there's lots of jokes. There's loads and loads of jokes about actors who...
Who tipple.
Who tipple, yes. There's a fund of stories about a great actor called Wilfrid Lawson. The Wilfrid Lawson stories, of course, the most famous of them all is Wilfrid Lawson, who's appearing in Dickie 3, and he's appearing in Richard III, and they were doing a matinee performance, and he and one of his Chinas were repaired to a local hostelry.
It was Robert Newton, the other one.
Several quarts later, they stagger back to do the matinee, and Wilfrid Lawson totters onto the stage and goes, and a gentleman in the circle who'd paid his money, after all, let's face it, every artist owes it. I think when an audience they pay the greatest compliment in the world. So this man stood up, he said, "Sir, you are disgustingly drunk." And Wilfrid Lawson just looked up and with a little sly look in his eye, he went, "Oh, you think I am drunk? Huh? You wait till you see the Duke of Buckingham."
It's like that marvellous one when Larry Olivier was doing Henry V, and because it was in Ireland, they shot it in Ireland, didn't they? Just before the end of the war, and because all the able-bodied men were out fighting for king and country and all that, and quite right too. They were a bit, as has been said before, the extras were a bit limp-wristed, and one. And had a few, you see. And they were doing the once more unto the breach, dear friends. This is true. This once more unto the breach, dear friends, once more. And so, in order that all these screamers didn't look too like that, you see, they put visors on and covered their faces so that they didn't go like that, and all that. And on the first take, Olivier came on this dirty great white horse saying, "Once more unto the breach, dear friends, once more, or close the wall up with our English dead. In peace there's nothing so becomes a man as modest stillness and humility, but when the tide of war blows in our ears, then imitate the action of a tiger." And from behind this visor a voice said, "That's right, you tell 'em, girl."
When you were reminiscing there.
I was.
Yeah, you were reminiscing.
I was. It was murder behind that visor.
Richard III. Quick story. Richard III, and they're getting on with it. Matinee performance, and somebody tells the actors before the show play starts, that Tom Arnold, who at that time was the famous king of pantomime, Tom Arnold was in the audience that afternoon, you see. Now, pantomime is a lovely Christmas pudding mixture of all branches of show business. There's actors, singers, dancers, jugglers. But the actors do like to get in pantomime because they play the part of the demon king or the squire, anybody with a big voice. Blah, blah, blah. So this actor playing Dickie 3, he obviously had his eye on pantomime because he knew Tom Arnold was in the front. And he staggers onto the stage and said, "Now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer. Oh, yes, it is."
I love it.
But that doesn't explain why this producer was nonplussed on what he did to Jimmy Wheeler.
What did he do? What did he do?
He told him that Frank Carson was going very well, and it sobered him up immediately, and he went on.
I think
Good answer.
It must be very difficult for a producer to have a comedian...
A drunk, yeah.
Comedian on his... Well, not necessarily drunk. A comedian on his hands who he feels is perhaps a little bit, volatile, a little bit sort of, iffy. Likely to do...
Yuppie.
He probably substituted the bottles for, one of these health-giving drinks.
Yes.
No, until he's frowned.
No, what he actually did, you're getting close, but what he actually did was a kindly way of avoiding embarrassment. While Jimmy was on one of his frequent trips to the loo, several cronies were installed in his dressing room, and when the great man returned, they all congratulated him on a superb performance. And this convinced Jimmy that he'd already been on stage and done his act. And he was content to be put in a taxi and driven home.
Well, that's a good way. See, that's a touch of...
That's lovely, that.
That's playing on a person's weakness. An old man of 75 was in bed with his wife, dear lady wife, and he turned over and nibbled her ear. 75, they're at Blackpool, you see, and he nibbled her ear, and she turned around and she said, "You've had it." She said, "I don't remember." He's not.
Well,
it's like the old man of 75 who got married to the young girl of 18, and his friend said, "You're going to have to be very careful about sex. He said, why? He said, well, I mean, it could be faked. He said, well, if she dies, she dies.
Well, on the way here, I met an old man. He was crying just at the top of Regent Street, and I said, what's wrong? He said, well, I've married a young lady of 29-year-old. She's so kind to me. And he says, I'm 74, and she's bought me this lovely suit. And she feeds me like nobody's business, and we make love 3 times a week, and oh, it's dreadful. I said, well, what are you crying for? He said, I forget where I live.
Yeah. You get these old cocks. An old cock of 80 will marry a young bird. You know, a young lady of 25. They'll try anything for rheumatism. This.
How about the old guy? About the old guy who said who got married to this young girl, this old guy. About 94 he was, and his friend said, how do you manage it? He said, oh, nearly every night. He said, yes, he really. He said, yes, Nick.
Well, that always reminds me of the lovely story when they call women the weaker sex. There was a queue up at heaven, you see, and St. Peter came out and he said, those men who were boss of the household stand on the right, and those who were henpecked stand on the left. And all the men moved to the left, except one. And he stood there on his own. St. Peter said, well, you the boss of your house? He says, no, the wife told me to stand over here.
Those marvellous stories are a perfect cue. They're all about human relationships, those last stories we heard. And so now I'm going to give our experts a chance to switch to giving advice. And that's a perfect cue for it. Various letters from all around the country, people who need the wise counsel of these 3 wise men. First of all, we come to our first particular letter from a lady in York, and she says this. How can I stop my husband snoring? I've tried corks down the back of his pajamas. And snore springs up his nose.
No! He was a Swedish film star. Jörgen Snorsprings, I knew him well.
Snorsprings. But nothing works. If I squeeze his nostrils, he just lets off a little whistle. Is there any other solution, Ken?
Yes, there is. There's a lady was complaining to another lady in the supermarket that her husband snored terribly. I've snored very, very badly. And, well, this lady didn't know what to do. She said, if he comes home in that state, he won't know what's going on. She said, take his clothes off and tie a ribbon. Came home, and make the one. To bed, fell onto the bed, absolutely out to the wine, and commences. Oh, she said, well, I'm not going to have a night of this. I'm not going to stand this all night. She said, I'll do what Mrs. Thingy up the road said. So she takes all his clothes off, and she had a box of chocolates that someone had given her for Christmas, and she'd saved the ribbon. So a beautiful big silken ribbon, and he's lying there in the buff. She right, this is it then, I'll try it. So she ties a ribbon on him. Tied a ribbon on him in a nice, and the bow as well. And immediately, stop. And she had a beautiful night's sleep. When she, making the breakfast the next morning, he staggers downstairs. Oh, no. She said, where the hell did you get to last night? He's like, I don't know where I got to, he said. But wherever it was, I won first prize.
Frank, what do you think about this?
Well, I knew a fellow who snored so loudly, he actually wakened himself up. But there was a friend of mine, I think the answer to that would be to buy one of those water beds. Those people who think, well, I'll go out and get a water bed because a friend of mine, the thermostat went wrong and he was poached to death.
One more suggestion for this lady.
Oh, yeah.
What she should do to stop her husband snoring, if your husband snores, Just when you're both going to bed at night, take 2 house bricks to bed with you. Take 2 house bricks and let him see them. He'll be too frightened to go to sleep. He won't snore.
Brilliant advice. Leslie.
Yes.
Well, I think you see, the problem about all snoring is it's all caused by nightmares. We had a daily once whose husband was mad about football, and I made the mistake once of saying to her, how is it? She said, it's terrible. Eats, drinks, and sleeps football. She said, he doesn't have nightmares anymore, he has cooked eyes. She said, every night we go enough to bed, he sits up bolt upright with his eyes shut, shouts up the Rovers, and we're off. He said he had me out of bed 6 times last night with corner kicks. He said, I had him with me hot water bottle this morning. It didn't work. He shouted out foul and gave me a free kick right in the penalty area. It was murder. And he said, and eventually, apparently, she bought this whistle, and she blew this whistle, and it was the worst thing she could have done, because he went straight out of bed, got into the kitchen, took a lemon from the larder, sucked it for 5 minutes, jumped back into bed, and started playing the second half. And he changed ends. I mean, it was terrible. And in 3 o'clock in the morning, she found him under the bedclothes with his torch saying, do you fancy a friendly by floodlight? I mean, it's not right.
Well, that's... Actually, in fact, I was going back many years, and you remember we used to go into the old pro digs.
Yeah.
Nowadays, of course, we can afford hotels, but in those days, it used to be about £5 for the hall and use of the stairs. And I remember being put in, and this fella, he was an acrobat, and he said to me, do you mind sleeping in the same bed as me? I said, no, not at all. He says, the only thing about me is I snore. And I said, well, it's okay, I've got a cure for that. And we both got into bed, and I kissed him in the cheek, and he sat up all night.
Well, I think we've
We're
got
now
some,
engaged.
I think we've got some very good advice there. Very good advice there, and I think the best practical advice probably is Ken's there. Take 2 bricks, take 2 house bricks. And we've time for one more agony aunt problem.
Did you see a little bit at the end? If I squeeze his nostril, he just lets off a little whistle.
I think that's a misprint. Now, let's out a little whistle. I hope it's a misprint.
Right, we've just got time for one more of these before we move back into the major tall tales. And this one is from a man in Bristol who writes, my problem is pimply legs, which I prefer to conceal with a smart pair of socks. Alas, sock suspenders now seem practically unobtainable. Are there any other ways for men to keep their socks up? Leslie?
Well, the best cure for him, of course, is actually to get rid of the pimples. And there is a marvellous new skin tonic on the market. And you rub it on. It doesn't exactly get rid of the pimples. It brings the rest of the skin up on a level with them. Wonderful. That's the answer, really.
Well, I knew a fellow who had a pimple on the back of his neck. He was from Scotland. He used to use it as a collar stud. But what to do here, if you want to wear a pair of socks, well, it is difficult now getting suspenders. So what you can do is buy a toupee and put 2 elastic clips over the ears and run them down the side of the body. And it means to say, not only will it hold your socks up, but your hair won't blow up.
Does that seem right to you, Ken?
I think if you've got pimply legs, you've got pimply legs, haven't you? What the answer to it is, be like the leg. We should wear tights.
That's right.
Wear tights. Now, I've tried this. It doesn't... It's a bit embarrassing for a man because the tights do tend to ride up and make you a bit crotchety.
Oh.
But
And besides...
I have worn tights.
Makes your legs look like a bag of monkey nuts.
You haven't seen I have very nice legs.
You've nice monkey nuts as well.
Yes.
Well, we think, really, there's no cure for this poor chap. I mean, if you've got pimply legs, sir, you've got pimply legs, but Mr. Dodd says, try some tights. Middle-aged taxi driver Alexei Sampos. We're back now to the true life stories, and I want your explanation.
Yes.
Middle-aged taxi driver Alexei Sampos suspected that his young wife was being unfaithful to him, but she denied it, and he wanted to believe her. Then, alas, an event occurred that confirmed Alexi's suspicions. What was that, Frank?
Well, I'd rather not deal with this question yet because I'm working on a certain train of thought. Which,
Has it left the station yet?
I would ask Mr. Dodd, though, because he's a lot of the experience and he's an older man. And a much wiser man, I'm sure.
Frank Carson, of course, knows nothing about taxi drivers at all because, naturally, being
I don't like
being
them,
a
actually.
being a star, he goes everywhere in
By car.
his Irish Rolls-Royce.
Yeah.
And
Pony and trap.
so he knows nothing about taxi driving. In fact, he went to a musical the other night and thought it was all about taxis. It was Come to the Cab, Hooray.
Yes, well, I said to a taxi driver, can you take me to Waterloo? I've got to catch a train. He said, we're a bit late for the battle, aren't you?
Not too late, Frank.
So what do you think? What do you think, then? What was the giveaway?
I think he probably dropped a passenger. I know. He was driving his cab. He picked up a passenger, and this fella asked to be dropped off at 29 Masaka Street, which is where he lived.
Absolutely correct.
Ah, there you are.
Oh, is that right? Well.
That was marvellous.
Alas, that's all we've got time for, dear friends. If you've got any tall tales to amaze us with or problems you'd like aired, we'd love to hear from you. In the meantime, David Frost here, thanking you for joining us on behalf of KenDodd, Leslie Crowther and Frank Carson, devisers and researchers Andrew Palmer and NELL Brennan, and our producer Edward Taylor. And we hope you'll join us next time. It's time to pull the other one.
Oi.